always knows just what to do.
Good evening. How are you? Happy Tuesday. Welcome. You are on IntellectualRadio.com. This is the Wise Wife Radio Show, and I am Lynn Sharif. So appreciate all of you joining us today. And today, my topic isn't specifically about married folks. Really, I'm focusing on us as individuals. But it impacts marriage because if you are your best self, then you're going to be a better partner. And so there's a really interesting article that grabbed my attention. It's written by a gentleman by the name of Sean Grover, and it is called Tackling Self-Induced Misery. Say it again. It is Tackling Self-Induced Misery. And so the premise behind the article is that many people, and I know you can attest to this, many people are miserable. And those miserable folks, maybe they will try a new job. If you're single, you might think, you know what, I'm going to get a new relationship. If you're married, you might say, I'm going to either disconnect from this marriage emotionally, or maybe you might have an affair. But the thing about that and making those moves is that happiness that comes from it, it's fleeting. Because let's face it, jobs can go wrong, relationships get cool, and then you may find yourself right back at square one of feeling miserable. And if these tendencies go unaddressed, that sustainable happiness that you're looking for may elude you. So those folks, if they're right back at square one and miserable again, they may be thinking, why am I here again? So let's discuss this from a practical and a clinical perspective. I have invited friend of the show, Zenola Diggs. Remember that she is a master's in marriage and family therapy. She's a master's in Christian counseling. She is a behavioral mental health professional, and she's a licensed pastor. So she's joining us today to talk about self-induced misery. Welcome to the show, Zenola.
Good evening, Lynn. Welcome, show guest.
Yes. So glad to have you here today. Glad to have you here today. And I imagine that you know a lot about this because not only are you counseling a lot of couples, you also work in a prison.
Yes, I do. A women's prison at that.
Very, very interesting. And maybe some of these self-inducing misery behaviors, you've seen them before.
I see them every day. And as a matter of fact, as you were giving an introduction, I wasn't even thinking about the work I do as a mental health professional in the prison. I'm a therapist for inmates. But what I was thinking of is just our own lives. You know, my own experiences, you know, and things that I've done. So it's a mindset. It's a mindset. And that's what we have to break out of in order to get out of this misery.
Absolutely.
That we're talking about tonight.
Absolutely. And so, folks, if you're just joining us, we are talking about an article which is done by Sean Grover, and it's talking about tackling self-induced misery. But I want to start out by saying that this term self-induced misery is not a clinical diagnosis. Like you're not going to see this in the DSM-5, but the behaviors, you may see some of the behaviors show up in the DSM-5, but there are many people that engage in these behaviors that make them unhappy. So I want to first talk about what are some signs that you or someone you know may be in self-induced misery, some of the behaviors. Have you run into a person who just is relentlessly finding fault with everything? Always something wrong with everything they see. You know anybody like that?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. Another area, and this is really huge these days, blaming other people in order to avoid responsibility. Avoiding responsibility. We seem to be in a society where no one wants to take accountability for their actions. It's always someone else's fault. I imagine that might be what you see a lot of counseling people in prison.
Well, it's personality disorders, and that's the umbrella that it all falls under. And the root of that are unmet expectations. And what happens is I was really targeting on what you said about always blaming someone else. And where that stems from, Lynn, is not so much that the other person has not met an expectation, has not met our standards, but we haven't met our own. And so we don't have anyone else to blame. And so those people or that person may be in the line of fire because we're not happy with ourselves. And so when we're talking about misery, for the sake of the discussion, what it boils down to is depression. That's all it is. It's basically depression, and people confuse depression with, well, I have to be in a fetal position, laying in my bed with all the lights off, that type of thing. Depression will rise up in a lot of different ways, in people. It could be manic, which means that you can be a shopaholic, or you can overindulge in drinking. You can see people that look like they're happy all the time, and actually it's a form of depression because they're masking the real issue most of the time.
Yes, absolutely. We talked about this. If you don't address the issue, it's going to manifest in some way.
Right.
And so we talked about some of the signs. Some of the other ones would be, again, constant complaining, feeling victimized, that someone is against you, that it's someone else's fault. But another one that's really interesting, and we see it a lot in our society, is this hunger for validation.
Right.
Hunger for validation. And how might that look? It could look like a person who is constantly praising themselves. They are constantly praising themselves because they just have a hunger to be validated. And if you're not saying it, then I'm going to say it.
That's called narcissism, huh?
This is very true. That is a clinical term.
That is narcissism.
And so, folks, if you're just joining us, we are talking about the article Tackling Self-Induced Misery. And we are talking about some of the signs. We've got Zanola Diggs, Master's in Marriage and Family Therapy. She is a licensed pastor. She's talking to us, interestingly enough, because she also treats patients at the local women's prison. And some of the signs that people could be in this self-induced misery are avoiding responsibility, constant complaining, always finding fault with everything else, hunger for validation. And there's something else that they call delusional nostalgia. Delusional nostalgia. The example, I think, and maybe you may or may not have seen this movie. I think it was from the 80s. And this guy he just relived him being a football star. Napoleon Dynamite. That's it. He just relived over and over when he was in high school and how he was a star and everything was wonderful. And it's nostalgia, but again, you delude yourself into, talking about how great you are. But again, all of this stuff is really how it manifests that there's something going on underneath.
Well, I think too, it comes from not really getting in touch with your own stuff, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
We haven't addressed our own issues and our own traumas, in our own lives. And when you're talking about, again, that prison mentality, we take ourselves to prison every day because we're locked up in our own heads. And we haven't adapted a winning mentality to get out of our practical way, or our expected ways of living. And so we become victims of all those unmet expectations, those things that I wish I should have, could have, no one ever did this for me. Which we treat ourselves like the good dishes. We only bring them out on special occasions when we should be, celebrating ourselves every day.
Absolutely.
But we're waiting for that right time or that right someone to make it worthwhile and make ourselves so worthy when really we have it all within ourselves. So
we do.
Got to stop postponing our happiness and start doing things now and stop waiting for the right time. And when we keep waiting for the right time, we're going to be miserable because when is the right time to live?
Today is the day, because I was sharing on the show on last week that this is not a dress rehearsal. My faith community, we've recently lost a young father, and it just like that. And life is like a vapor. It is just like that. And so let's not put off until tomorrow what we really could do today. And I want to cover a couple more of what some of these misery behaviors look like. Because you may, if you think about the people that you're encountering at your work or at your job, or if you have a volunteer service, people who are lovers of conflict, you know that person. That if they're around, it's gonna be something. There is going to be a conflict. They are lovers of conflict, saying all the, again, saying things, setting it off, that type of thing. And the phrase that comes to my mind is that hurt people, right?
Absolutely.
Right. So if you're encountering someone like this, perhaps give them a little grace in recognizing that, yes, they're unpleasant. Lovers of conflict are not pleasant to be around. There's another type of behavior called oppositional defiance. And these are people who are defiant to any type of authority. That could be at your job. That could be even in a volunteer. Folks who volunteer a lot, you know you meet all kinds of people. You meet all kinds of people because you can't turn away a volunteer. So people who just are defiant to any type of authority. This is really a lot of what we see in our society today, right?
Well, it's misplaced control.
Yes.
Too. It's a control mechanism that's really misplaced. And so when someone feels that they have lost footage or they've lost authority, then of course they're going to, be defiant because now no one's looking at me. No one's, like you said, no one's validating me. And so I'm constantly in this constant phase of trying to find myself and not really being happy with myself.
Absolutely.
And so when you see people like that, they're not happy with themselves. It has nothing to do with the victim.
Yes.
But everything to do with the perpetrator.
Yes. And we've been talking about more overt behaviors. And if you are just joining us, we're talking about the article Tackling Self-Induced Misery. So if you're single, if you're married, this has more to do with the individual and how you can get to a better place. Come, let us heal together. But we were talking about some of these overt behaviors, people who like conflict, but there are also more passive behaviors that are really more in line with self-neglect. But that is also a self-induced misery. If you have poor diet or not exercising, sedentary lifestyle, those are passive ways of not standing up for yourself. Passive ways of self-induced misery. Social isolation or no hobbies. And I certainly saw myself here some years ago, and it was more around hobbies when I actually was asked very directly, what are your hobbies? I didn't have an answer. I did not have an answer. And I wasn't necessarily miserable or anything, but I did not have hobbies. And here's the thing, because actually, if you hear my husband's testimony, he talked about a time in his life when his entire being, everything was around his family, his children, his marriage, and he didn't have anything that just was a self-care move for himself. And that's really important. That's very important.
Yeah, I'm glad you're bringing these things up because now we're talking about solutions. And, and I'm all about a solution, not trying to fix it because it's not for me to fix it. It's for people to realize they already have the tools. They need to start to use them.
Absolutely.
And so there is a book that I would like to recommend. It's called Unf Yourself. You heard it?
I have.
And it's by Gary John Bishop. And in that book, well, first of all, let's go back to the title. And I believe, the reason why that he titled that book that way is a wake-up call. And it shocks you into reality. Because
Yes.
in order to get un-effed, you have to be effed up, right?
Yes.
You can't believe, some people may not believe I even said that, but it's reality. And so one of the ways to do that is, he says, to embrace uncertainty and get out of your own comfort zone. And so a lot of times people don't want to take that step into doing something different and trying something new. And so if you're doing the same thing all the time and your life is mundane, guess what you're going to be? Miserable.
Yes.
Because you haven't
Absolutely.
tried anything new. And then you're postponing your happiness, but do it now. It goes back to, like I said, treating yourself like the good dishes, like the good towels. You're waiting for the right time to do it. You're worth celebrating. So do that. And then be
Absolutely.
responsible for yourself. Stop, letting someone else, putting that blame on someone else or other people. Not so much a spouse or a boyfriend. It could be even your job or your boss, or your co-workers.
Yes. So un-F yourself. I'm going to have someone put that in the Instagram chat as well. So again, we have no hobbies, social isolation. Another huge one is procrastination.
Yeah.
Whew. Oh, I saw myself written all over that. But I'll tell you what, listen, I've been scared straight. I had a scenario where I had procrastinated for no good reason and almost lost out on some money because I just didn't do the thing I was supposed to do. And I was just terrified. I was terrified that my complete lack of action was going to cost my family something. And that scared me straight. So I am determined to beat procrastination. I'm not doing it anymore.
Right. I mean, when you said that, I remember I have a bad habit when people used to have checks. And I would have a check in my purse for weeks. Just wouldn't cash it. I don't know, with no good rhyme or reason. It was just one of those things. It was one more thing I had to do.
Absolutely.
And that's how, we live our life with all these uncashed checks and all these unmet responsibilities and tasks that we really need to take care of because it's right in front of us. But for some reason, we just won't do it.
Absolutely. And a question came up in the chat. Why do we procrastinate? And one, I mean, at least me, I know mine was just being lazy, being lazy and trying to motivate. It's just a lack of desire to motivate yourself to do the things that you need to do because you need to do them. And then keep in mind, because it's a circle, because remember, we're talking about self-induced misery. And so don't you hate yourself when you're sitting there laying there thinking about the thing that you didn't do? You're like, oh my gosh, I am so lazy. And
well,
go ahead.
Let's kind of refocus that a little bit.
Okay.
Something, well, you're right. It can be laziness, but sometimes it's just that one more thing I have to do. It's just one more task I have to complete. And so what we do is procrastination comes out of those things that we can control, or that we feel that at least I can control this. I can do this when I get good and darn ready.
That is true. Yeah, that is true, because at the very basis of the self-induced misery, at the very core is this feeling of powerlessness. But this is the one thing I can control.
Right.
Okay. Okay.
And it may be misplaced. The result may be negative or harmful, but at least it didn't happen until I said it was going to happen. I didn't do it until I got ready to do it. But who are you hurting?
Yourself.
So,
yourself.
Exactly.
You are hurting yourself. So, folks, we're talking about how can you motivate yourself to change your behavior and make new choices, and remembering that seeking these short-term external solutions like eating, like stuffing your feelings, or drinking, or, we're in Illinois, marijuana is legal. Maybe you've just ridden by there and that's another way for you to, again, it's a self-induced misery. It's something that you're doing, which is a really short-term. It's a short-term solve. So we don't want to leave you here. We don't want to leave you here and say, okay, well, this is just it. Just stop it. No, we're going to give you some steps. So let's get 5 steps if you see yourself in anything that we are talking about, and recall that we are talking about self-induced misery, the behaviors that you see, some signs that you may be that person, or you may know this person and suspect that they are in self-induced misery. The first thing you have to do is to get your support system in place.
Right.
You have to pull together your sister and your brother friends, not your pseudo friends, but the ones who you can be transparent with to say, this is something that I have to stop. I got to get myself in the gym. I have got to do better with my food, and finding someone to hold you accountable.
Mm-hmm.
And we have Zanola Diggs on the line. She is a counselor. Maybe you might need a counselor. Maybe you need a counselor or a life coach or a spiritual advisor, your pastor, but you have to get a support system in place, because understand that changing your life like this is not going to always be fun. There are going to be days that it's much easier just to continue to do what you've always done.
Right. But, even before you take that step, maybe, a lot of people, how we are, we don't tell our business, or we don't go to therapy. But that's just a misnomer. That's the thing of the past. Everyone needs somebody, somebody they can confide in, and someone, like you said, to hold them accountable. But something that we can do for ourselves, too, is set goals, and visions for ourselves. And I'm a pastor, so I have to say this. There's a scripture, Habakkuk 2:2-3 says, write the vision and make it plain.
Absolutely.
So it's something about writing something down. You have to envision yourself where you want to be.
Yes.
And so start writing down, how do you see yourself? Where are those places I want to go? What are those things that I want to do? And maybe start checking them off. And as you start seeing yourself accomplishing things, then your whole mindset and your whole energy will renew itself.
It absolutely will, because then you are able to see that you can do it. And
you're making movement.
You're making movement. I don't care where you are today. Write that vision. See those things that are not as though they were. So no matter what it looks like today, imagine what it looks like if you are out of this cycle by this time next year. And so, yes, making goals. Get your support system in place. Well, maybe this should have been number one, but identifying problem behaviors. Do you waste too much time on social media?
So easy to do.
You fall down the Instagram hole, and here you are 4 hours later.
Scrolling.
What could you have done with that 4 hours? Think about it.
Yeah.
Think about it. So is that the problem behavior that you need to do something about? Are you unhappy with your weight? Do you procrastinate? So identify what it is that you need to change. Get your support system. And then the next thing is really, I always say, how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time. This is a long road, but just find one thing. Can you do one thing? Doing the whole
small
thing?
bites.
Right, small bites.
Mm-hmm.
If you can just do one thing differently, can you make one different food choice? Can you make a decision on that one thing, not the 10 things that you have on your list? Make a decision to do something about that one thing.
One thing.
Yeah.
Right. Because when you get overwhelmed, what are you going to do? You're not going to want to do any of it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Right? So,
absolutely.
Small victories.
Small victories, because you may become overwhelmed with all of it. I also, the next thing is to reprioritize. Yes, kale salad. Yes, small bites, kale salad. That's the best choice. You got Chef over here laughing. Reprioritize self-care. Can you find a workout buddy? A person who is walking this same road as you, if that is your area, or finding one hobby or identifying something that you might be interested in. And you may not know. I ended up finding my hobbies just quite by happenstance. I ended up taking up calligraphy, and I also found out that I like firearms. I like going to the gun range. So that's a whole new hobby, totally different. But I didn't know. So I explored different things, and I found the thing the things that were of interest to me. So
But you
reprioritize
have to allow
self-care.
yourself to do that, though, right?
Yes, I did. Well, because I
Okay.
realized I was in a place that this was not a good place where I was like, I don't have anything that I do, go to work, come home, go to church. That's not enough. You have to do something for yourself as well.
Right.
And so the last thing that is your path to something different is really, just challenging these self-destructive behaviors and recognizing that you need to make a change. And I'm going to encourage you that if you can tackle these things, and maybe this whole thing, maybe you're not completely down the hole of self-induced misery, but maybe there are a few things that we mentioned that you'd like to change. And so this is encouragement that if you can make this thing better, that you are going to be a better spouse if you're married, you're going to be a better friend to the people that are around you, better for your family if you can stick with it.
Right. Imagine yourself where you want to be. I think, if you can't do anything else, do that. You have to have a vision, because without vision, people perish.
That's it. You just sit there on the couch, and you may not perish physically, but you may perish mentally. And again, I think what happens, because here's the thing, I started a workout plan a few years ago, and I promise you that it would feel so much better for me to sit on my couch, because I got a little recliner couch too. And so trust me, it feels really good. It's hard to motivate yourself to get off the couch, but there were just some things that I did not like seeing, and I wanted to see the change. And so I had to do the hard thing. And the hardest thing is really just getting started. So I want to encourage you that the hardest thing is just getting started, identifying these things, get your people, get your board of directors, and get after it. Is there anything that you would add in closing?
In closing, I would just say, just do it. I mean, there's something to that very simple slogan. You just have to do it. And maybe if you do it today, you do it tomorrow. And then if you don't do it tomorrow, then there's the next day. But you have to keep moving, and you have to see yourself being your best self.
Absolutely.
And not waiting on other people to validate you. You have to see yourself being your best self. And I think when you can envision that, the world is unstoppable, So just do it.
Just do it. Just do it. I appreciate you, Zanola, for joining us today. And folks, share this broadcast with someone, maybe someone that you're seeing some of these behaviors in, and you want to offer encouragement. So please share this program. And we will be back here next Tuesday, 7:00, same time, same place. Actually, there is, are there any questions for Zanola? I'm just double checking. I want to make sure I check my comments to see if there are any comments before we let her go. Just checking. Okay. No questions.
Well,
so again,
great. Well, thanks for having me on, and I'll look forward to the next time.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you guys joining us tonight. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye now.
My mister is kind. My mister